Rick, tell us all about it. I read it. I couldn't believe the numbers. First of all, the 41 people in the administration, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. The Treasury, Department of Labor, just about everywhere. What do you know?
Well, Eric, thanks for having me on. This is one of the most outrageous things I've ever seen. You know, when you go and you work for the federal government, particularly as a special assistant or as a political appointee, you take an oath to defend the Constitution, just like the President of the United States does, just like every congressman does. You take an oath. And these people who have failed to pay their taxes, who have looked aside and said, it doesn't apply to me, tax laws don't apply to me, they should be fired. We should give them 30 days. President Obama should give them 30 days, clear up the books. If they can't clear up the books, they need to be out of there. They have no business whatsoever.
Rick, part of the problem is they have the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee who writes tax law, who's in trouble himself, can't figure out his own tax. And then the guy who's in charge of enforcing tax law, Tim Geithner, is also questionable. I don't see any penalties going their way.
Well, you're right. It's when we made the decision to look aside to Tim Geithner and Hilda Saliser, whose husband had problems at Department of Labor, and of course Charlie Rangel, who's got his own set of problems. When they made that decision, they set a pretty bad example. But the bottom line is we don't need to look at the past. We need to look at the future. This president has a responsibility. He's running a $1.46 trillion deficit. That's a lot of money. And the fact is, this government is spending money like they have it. And what they need to start doing is these people are making the decisions that we need to have more taxes, higher taxes, raise taxes on the people who make over $200,000 a year. Those people need to pay their own taxes, or they need to get the heck out.
You make a great point, Rick. Hang in there and bring the panel in. Levine, how about that? That's a nice way to pay for the Bush tax cuts, start getting the money that the White House owes the IRS.
I'll tell you, I firmly believe in tax enforcement. I remember when I worked in Congress, we tried to get more IRS agents out there. The Republicans said, no, let the tax cheats alone. Everybody should pay their taxes, and what's interesting about the study is the vast majority of the people not paying their taxes, people in the military. If you note,
Joey Jackson,
2 billion of the 3 billion is veterans serve their country.
638 workers on Capitol Hill owe $9.3 million. 1,204 Treasury employees owe $7.6 million. How about 4,856 Homeland Security employees owe the IRS $37 million?
Well, Eric, let's put everything in perspective. First of all,
but here's the question, Joey. I mean, look,
80,000 people in the military.
There's a culture of corruption on the Hill. We already know that. But there's also a culture of if you cheat on your taxes, we're not going to nail you for it. What about that?
Okay, well, a couple of things. First of all, I interned for Congressman Rangel on Capitol Hill, and I could tell you he's an honorable guy and worked very hard for his constituents. I'm not condoning the fact he didn't pay his taxes, but he did what he needed to do. Now, let us put this argument into perspective. It is not only government workers. First of all, we're not talking about criminal activity here. We're talking about people who owe back taxes. Back taxes and owing back taxes, Eric, is consistent with a whole lot of Americans. It's
wait,
not
are we
just
talking about
limited to
Geithner, who said he couldn't figure out his taxes? Is that what you're talking about? Hold on. Guy Benson, if I forgot to pay my taxes like Mr. Rangel did, or if I didn't know I owed it like Mr. Geithner did, do I get the same slack cut to me, or am I going to pay penalty and interest and maybe even go to jail?
That's what Rangel did. He paid penalty and interest.
Yeah, I think you're probably going to be in a lot of hot water. But I'm trying to figure out here, Congress is where tax law is made. And the executive branch, the White House, is where tax law is enforced. If you're not going to set the example there, we can, oh, well, a lot of Americans do this. They should be held to a much higher standard. And, Mark, I'm curious, where are you going with this military thing? I mean,
my point was that the study that Eric cites, 2 million of them were in the military. 2 billion of the money was in the military. I think everybody should pay their taxes.
I agree with that, but why are you going after the military here? I mean,
well, because the vast majority of people in the study were not people in the White House or Congress.
Yeah, but they're not the ones who write tax law, the military.
I think everybody should.
I just find that interesting.
Rick Manning, am I wrong when I'm saying 1,971 Justice Department employees who were not in the military owe $14.3 million, or 81 workers for the Federal Reserve System owe $1 million? I mean, it goes on, and almost every department seems to owe millions and millions of dollars. Why is this happening? Why aren't these people, A, number one, paying these penalties, B, number two, going to jail, or C, number three, thrown right out of federal jobs?
Well, I don't know why they've chosen not to pay their taxes. What I do know is they need to. I do know that it's a responsibility, and it's a special responsibility you have when you are an elected official, or if you are somebody who's been appointed to office. And certainly somebody who's a civil servant needs to be able to figure out that they need to pay their taxes, because after all, tax dollars are paying for their salaries. So they owe it to their employer, the U.S. taxpayer, to participate in the system equally, and when they don't, they're thumbing their noses at the very hand that feeds them, and it's just wrong.
Levine, last word. Mr. Geithner, Democrat, Mr. Rangel, Democrat. A lot of these, I'm guessing 41 of these people in the Obama executive
and I'm guessing the generals are not. Look,
the
vast majority, Eric, of people who owe back taxes don't do it to commit fraud. If they do, send them to jail. Most of them, they've had a health emergency, they've had a family death, they simply can't, their houses have been foreclosed upon.
Or in the case of the guy who writes tax code.
If they commit fraud, send them to jail.
Or in the case of the guy who writes tax code, he didn't know about it, or the guy who enforces it, he forgot about it.
By the way,
it was ambiguous. You know our tax code's a mess.
For joining us. Coming up, easy scholarships. If you know certain Congress people, we uncover the truth from Money Rock.